For most people, owning a Rolex is like checking off the first item on their how to be a rich guy list. But having a luxury watch for such a reason is really missing the point. That small tick-tocking device on your wrist carries with it over 100 years of history, and in this video we'll see just how deep the rabbit hole goes. The company Rolex is really the brainchild of one German orphan, Hans Wilsdorf. Having lost his parents at the age of 12, he was sent to a boarding school in Coburg by his aunt and uncle. There, Hans learned to speak English, and he was so good at it that after he graduated, he got a job as a translator at a firm in Switzerland. The firm's name was Kuno Korten, and it was one of the biggest watch exporters in Switzerland at the time. While working there, Hans was exposed to some of the most influential people in watchmaking. One such acquaintance was Hermann Egler, who had recently inherited a large ébauche factory after his father's death. Ébauche is a French word, and it refers to the unassembled components of a watch mechanism. With his newfound friends in high places, Hans decided to move to England, and in 1905 he founded his own company called Wilsdorf and Davis. Davis was the name of Hans's brother-in-law, who had lent money to finance the whole thing. Hans's first order of business was to get watches that he could sell. Now, wristwatches weren't very popular at the time. They were flimsy, accurate, and worn mostly by women. People of the higher class preferred pocket watches, which were seen as durable and would often be passed down generations. Hans saw a lot of potential in wristwatches, and so he got in touch with his friend Hermann Egler. Egler's factory would produce high-quality wristwatches, and Hans would import them to England, where he would sell them to local retailers. Wilsdorf and Davis was pretty successful early on, mostly due to the higher quality of their Swiss-made mechanisms. Hans had a good sense for marketing though, and he quickly realized the importance of brand recognition. He wanted people to associate their watches with his company, not the retailers. And so in 1908, he registered his own brand name, Rolex. The name was short and easy to remember, and so Hans started printing it on the dials of all his watches. The real catalyst for Rolex's popularity, however, was World War I soldiers at the time didn't have wristwatches in their standard equipment. As you can imagine, carrying around a pocket watch was pretty inconvenient, and Rolex ended up being a favorite among the military. The war popularized the brand name for its quality and durability, but it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. The British government imposed a wartime import duty of 33% on all luxury goods, including watches. This hit Hans's business very hard, and so in 1919 he moved his company to Geneva, where he incorporated it as Montres Rolex. The focal point of the new company was evolution, and having already popularized wristwatches, Rolex went one step further and tackled the next big challenge, making them waterproof. Rolex released their Oyster model in 1926. Hans Wilsdorf, being the marketing genius that he was, decided to promote the Oyster by giving it to a young girl named Mercedes Glitz. She became the first woman to swim across the English Channel in 1927, but when people started doubting her achievement, she decided to make the swim again. She almost made it the second time, but in the end the Coast Guard had to pull her out of the water barely 7 miles from the other shore. She was still wearing her Oyster, and it had perfectly tracked her swim down to the minute. It was an enormous marketing victory for Rolex, and they used this event for advertisement well into the 1950s. This was the first time the celebrity testimony was used to promote a watch, but Rolex didn't stop there. Lord Clydesdale became the first man to fly over Everest in 1933. He was wearing a Rolex. Malcolm Campbell became the first man to reach a speed of 300 miles per hour on land in 1935. He was also wearing a Rolex. The Trieste became the first manned vessel to reach the bottom of the Mariana Trench in 1960. It had a Rolex attached to its outside surface. The list goes on, and it shows just how good Hans Wilsdorf was at maintaining his brand. Hans Wilsdorf's death in 1960 marked the end of an era for Rolex. The ownership of the company was transferred to the Hans Willdorf Foundation, which still owns it to this day and uses his income for charity. Hans's death couldn't have come at a worse time, since the late 1960s and the early 1970s were the beginning of the quartz revolution. The invention of quartz clocks, the ones that run on batteries, was a devastating blow to the Swiss watch market. However, Rolex managed to survive the quartz revolution by relying on its brand and reputation. The time it takes to produce a single Rolex is over a year, and unlike most companies, Rolex doesn't outsource any of its production. Quality is everything to them, and when you look at some of their recent models, it's not hard to think of them as works of art. It's truly impressive how Rolex has managed to stay on top of the luxury watch industry for over a century. They've become more than just expensive watches. They're a symbol of wealth for bold, self-entitled rich kids and powerful men alike. I hope you enjoyed a Rolex story. If you did, hit that like button and check other Business Explored videos. Be sure to also check out the links in the description.